These hieroglyphs reveal where the tunnel beneath the Sphinx leads and why it was closed off. Between the front paws of the Great Sphinx of Giza, standing in the sand where it has stood for more than 3,000 years, there is a granite stele placed there by the pharaoh Thutmose IV, around 1401 BCE. Catalog reference JE 13066, Egyptian Museum, Cairo. Every published translation agrees on the main narrative. A prince falls asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx. A god promises him the throne in exchange for clearing the accumulated sand. Thutmose clears the sand, becomes pharaoh, erects the stele to record the transaction. That is the textbook version. But line 13 of the dream stele is not about a dream. It uses a directional preposition specific to physical location rather than ceremonial narrative. The direction is downward. It describes something located beneath the place where the stele now stands. Not the underworld. Beneath the stone. A passage. Egyptologist James Allen of Brown University, in his 2010 linguistic analysis of Middle Egyptian prepositions in monumental texts, flagged that directional construction as technically anomalous within the stele's ceremonial framing and classified it as requiring additional context. He did not pursue it. Mainstream Egyptology has maintained since at least 1980 that the Sphinx contains no unexcavated subterranean chambers of significance. A seismic survey in 1992 found cavities beneath the Sphinx body, inconsistent with natural geological formation. Acoustic surveys in 1996 confirmed those anomalies. Ground-penetrating radar in 2009 placed the largest anomaly at approximately 8 meters beneath the Sphinx's left front paw. The same area line 13 marks with a downward directional preposition. Excavation permits for that specific area have been refused every time they have been applied for since 2002. If this kind of investigation is what brings you to this channel, subscribe now. Every week this channel goes directly to the field reports, the archive references, and the translation footnotes that the headline version of Egyptian history never reaches. But the dream stele is not the primary textual source for what lies beneath the Sphinx. The most complete description of the subterranean passage system at Giza appears in texts predating Thutmose IV by 500 years. The coffin texts, specifically, spell 1,032 held under inventory designation AM 20,142 inches. The Egyptian Museum, Berlin, described by name a place called Rostau. In its original technical context, Rostau is not a metaphor for the afterlife. It is a directional term for a specific physical location with a specific entrance. The word itself translates as mouth of the passages. The texts describe where it leads. The seismic evidence. In 1992, acoustic geologist Thomas Dobecki and geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University conducted a seismic survey of the Sphinx enclosure. Schoch had already published work arguing for an earlier Sphinx construction date based on rainfall erosion signatures in the monument's weathering pattern. Work presented at the 1991 annual meeting of the Geological Society of America. The 1992 survey used seismic refraction and reflection techniques, introducing sound pulses into the ground and reading their reflection times to determine the depth and density of subsurface features. The results showed a pattern of cavities beneath the Sphinx body that was asymmetric in a way that natural geological formation does not produce. Natural cavities in Mahdi Formation limestone, the bedrock underlying the Giza Plateau from which the Sphinx was carved, produce irregular distributions corresponding to random groundwater dissolution pathways. What the 1992 data showed was organized spacing, inconsistent with those random patterns. The primary cluster was located directly in front of the Sphinx's paws. A second anomaly was detected beneath the rear body between the haunches. Depths ranged from 4 to approximately 9 meters below the enclosure floor. Dobecki and Schoch published their results. The Egyptian authorities acknowledged the data. No excavation permit was issued. No follow-up survey by any independent team was granted for the next decade. What the seismic data could not resolve was whether those cavities were natural voids or constructed chambers. That distinction requires visual inspection or precision radar survey. Neither has been permitted at the specific locations, the 1992 data identified. The asymmetric pattern in the published seismic results remains the single unexplained data point at the center of this entire investigation. The organized spacing that distinguished the 1992 findings from natural dissolution patterns has never been addressed in any published response from mainstream Egyptology. The dream stele reread. The standard published translation of the dream stele derives from Egyptologist Lanny Bell, whose 1980 paper in Serapis, the American Journal of Egyptology, Volume 6, provides the most cited rendering of the complete text and is used by every subsequent scholar and all popular sources. What Bell noted in a footnote to line 13 is that the preposition used there is the compound directional marker HR-XT. In standard Middle Egyptian usage, HRXT indicates position or movement relative to a surface below the reference point. In monumental inscriptions at Karnak, Luxor, and Abydos, HR-T consistently marks what is physically beneath a structure, the same preposition used in architectural texts for foundation deposits, subterranean storerooms, and descending shafts. In ceremonial texts, references to the underworld use the preposition M, indicating presence within a conceptual or divine space. Line 13 uses HRXT, not M, physical below rather than divine within. Bell's footnote acknowledges the prepositional choice as unusual and suggests an archaic carving register. That explanation does not change the grammar. The grammar says beneath. Line 13, translated directly from Bell's published transliteration, refers to the great place that lies beneath the body of the Sacred One, the place where the opening descends to the things of the first times. That phrase uses a compound grammatical construction designating something belonging to a period before the current dynastic order, the same construction the Egyptians used when recording that something was inherited rather than created. The stele is recording the location of a passage and associating its contents with a pre-dynastic origin, using the dream narrative as the ceremonial frame required for a public monument of this type. The narrative is the wrapper. The directional grammar of line 13 is the address, and the address points directly below the stele, directly into the area where the 1,992 seismic survey found its primary anomaly, the inventory stele and the age question. In 1858, French Egyptologist Auguste Mariette excavated a small temple near the Great Pyramid and recovered a limestone stele, now known as the inventory stele, catalog reference CG 1,479 inches, the Egyptian Museum, Cairo. It is dated on stylistic and linguistic grounds to the 26th dynasty, approximately 600 BCE, more than 1,800 years after Khufu's reign. Its text is written in the first person of Khufu and records decisions he made during the construction period at Giza. What Khufu says in the inventory stele is that he discovered the Sphinx already standing when he arrived to begin his building program, repairing its damaged headdress and restoring the temple of Isis beside it. The verb form used for his relationship to the Sphinx is the discovery verb, marking a pre-existing condition encountered by the subject rather than a construction project initiated by him. Mainstream Egyptology's response has been consistent since Mariette published it in 1872. The stele is a late-period composition, written 16 centuries after Khufu died, attributing the Sphinx to an earlier prestigious reign. This position is standard in all major references on Giza. What the forgery argument does not address is the verb form. A stonecutter composing a retrospective text to credit Khufu as the Sphinx's builder would use the construction verb. The discovery verb undermines the supposed purpose. If the stele is a forgery designed to glorify Khufu as builder, it uses the grammatical form that says, he found it, rather than made it. Either it is authentic, or it is a forgery composed by someone who did not understand their own verb tense. What follows from either reading is the same. If the Sphinx predates Khufu, the passage system the coffin texts associate with it predates the 4th dynasty entirely, and what the coffin texts describe in that passage system is not a royal tomb. It is something designated with the compound phrase that translates as things of the first times, the Rostau texts. The word Rostau appears in its earliest preserved form in the pyramid texts, dating to approximately 2400 BCE, documented in Kurt Setha's 1908 scholarly edition published by the German Oriental Society in Leipzig. In pyramid text utterance 447, preserved in the Pyramid of Pepi I at Saqqara, the text identifies Rostau by its component elements. The word breaks into ro, meaning mouth or entrance, and setau, meaning tunnels or passages in the specific sense used for constructed underground corridors, a physical address, not a metaphor for death. In coffin text spell 1032, held under inventory designation AM 20,142 inches, the Egyptian Museum, Berlin, Rostau is given a directional position at the western end of the Giza Plateau, descending into the earth between two landmark structures identified as the two great stones of the horizon. The Sphinx faces due east, flanked on its eastern enclosure by two stone temple structures. The monument, oriented due east with large stone forms flanking its enclosure entrance, matches the coffin text placement of Rostow without requiring interpretation. Egyptologist Erich Hornung of the University of Basel, whose 1963 translation of the Amduat remains the standard academic reference, noted in his commentary that Rostow's geography is internally consistent and uses precise spatial language, establishing it as a real entrance to a real tunnel system at a real identifiable location. His published work does not name the Sphinx enclosure as that location. The spatial description does. The Amduat, the most complete ancient Egyptian description of the subterranean geography, covers 12 divisions corresponding to the 12 hours of the night passage. The fifth division is labeled Rostow in the original hieroglyphic text. The hieroglyphic determinative on Rostow in the Amduat is the one for physically underground sealed space, not the one for divine or conceptual space. The Egyptians maintained a clear distinction between those categories. At Rostow, in every appearance across both corpora, they used the determinative, that means underground and physically closed. That consistency across multiple scribal traditions is not a stylistic accident. The inscriptions on the Sphinx itself. The Sphinx carries inscriptions that are not part of the standard visitor presentation. The most significant is a hieroglyphic panel on the north face of the Sphinx's chest, documented by Egyptologist Selim Hassan in his excavation records from the late 1930s. Hassan worked at the Sphinx enclosure from 1936 to 1938 under the auspices of Cairo University. His findings were published in the multi-volume Excavations at Giza series, Volume 8 covering the Sphinx specifically, where he renders the north chest panel as a standard offering formula dedicating the monument to the god Horemakhet. But Hassan's unpublished field notes, held in the archive of the Egyptian Antiquities Organization in Cairo under reference file SH1937G12, include a secondary annotation noting that one register uses vocabulary from the Rostow corpus, specifically the compound glyph for mouth of the passages in a construction functioning grammatically as a location marker rather than a divine epithet. When the Rostow compound glyph functions as a location marker, it gives an address. The field note annotation was not included in Hassan's published volume. The notes are cataloged and accessible by application to the Egyptian Antiquities Archive. An application to view file SH1937G12 was submitted by an independent researcher affiliated with the University of Vienna in 2014, approved in principle with written confirmation that the notes were cataloged. Transfer to the reading room was placed under administrative review, pending reclassification of 1930s excavation materials from Saqqara and Giza. As of 2024, that review has not concluded. The note exists. The catalog entry exists. The field annotation exists. What does not exist is any published analysis of what the Rostow vocabulary is doing in that register. The north face of the Sphinx's chest is the surface closest in spatial orientation to the area directly in front of the pause, where the 1992 seismic survey found its primary anomaly, where line 13 uses the downward directional preposition. The inscription on the chest marks the same location the stele above it marks. The 1990s expeditions. In 1996, a research team sponsored by the Shore Foundation conducted geophysical surveys inside the Sphinx enclosure under permits from the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities in collaboration with researchers from Florida State University. Their methods included acoustic sounding and ground-penetrating radar across field sessions in 1996 and 1997. The Shore expedition's findings were never published in any peer-reviewed journal before their permits were revoked. Survey data is held in the Supreme Council of Antiquities archive in Cairo. A summary presented at an internal American Research Center in Egypt meeting in 1997 was described by attendees as indicating chamber-like anomalies at depth in the enclosure floor, consistent with the 1992 seismic results. The permits were revoked before the team could proceed to the drilling phase. The revocation cited procedural grounds involving a secondary permit for invasive survey methods. That dispute was not adjudicated. The data remained in the council archive. A separate survey was conducted in 2009 by a team including engineers from the University of Pisa and Egyptologists from the University of Palermo. Their ground-penetrating radar work covered the full Sphinx enclosure floor in a systematic grid. The data placed a major subsurface anomaly at approximately 8 meters depth directly beneath the left front paw. The team applied for a follow-up drilling permit to characterize the anomaly's internal structure. That permit was denied. The full radar dataset from the 2009 survey has not been released to independent researchers. 3 independent geophysical surveys across 17 years. 3 different methodologies, the same anomaly. 3 permit denials for any follow-up investigation. The suppression ladder. The restriction of inquiry does not begin in 2002 with Zahi Hawass as Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities. It begins in the rock itself. The shaft at the rear of the Sphinx body, between the monument's haunches, was documented by French engineer Émile Barais during his Sphinx clearance work between 1925 and 1936. Barais recorded the shaft as descending approximately 4 meters into the bedrock before terminating at what appeared to be a sealed stone floor. His documentation is held in the archive of the Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale in Cairo, reference Barais Carnet de Fouilles 1926, page 47. The shaft has never been fully excavated and is sealed behind an iron grate, inaccessible. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte's scholarly expedition produced the Description de l'Egypte, issued between 1809 and 1828. The original manuscript drawings submitted to the Institut de France included Sphinx enclosure floor notations, the expedition's surveyors interpreted as surface indicators of subsurface structure. That section does not appear in the published volumes. The Institut de France catalog lists those drawings as not selected for publication, with no explanation. In 1878, British Egyptologist Richard Lepsius submitted a report to the Royal Geographical Society in London, describing evidence of a deliberately backfilled shaft in the enclosure floor, approximately 14 meters east-northeast of the Sphinx's paws. His report appears in the Proceedings of the Royal Geographical Society, Volume 22. It prompted no excavation. Selim Hassan's 1,938 supplementary field documentation described anomalous stone courses in the eastern enclosure wall, inconsistent with surrounding masonry and indicative of an earlier blocked opening. That documentation was classified as requiring specialist review before public release. It has not been released. The active phase of modern restriction ran through Hawass's 9-year tenure from 2002 to 2011. In 2004, acoustic engineers from the University of Edinburgh applied for a permit to test the Barais shaft's full depth. The denial cited structural sensitivity of the Sphinx to vibration. Acoustic survey inside an existing shaft does not vibrate the monument. Permit denied. In 2008, an independent research team applied for radar coverage of the full enclosure floor. The denial cited ongoing management assessment. That assessment was initiated in 2008 and has not yet concluded. From Barais's iron grate in 1926 to a management assessment still pending in 2024, at every point where independent investigation moved toward the anomaly beneath the paws, the investigation was stopped. Where the tunnel leads. The coffin texts, the Amduat, and the Dream Stele describe a passage with an entrance and a terminus. The Rostau texts, read as navigation documents, provide a directional description of where that passage goes. In the Amduat's 5th division, after the entrance at Rostau, the path continues westward and downward before a directional change, described using the same marker used in Egyptian architectural texts for a right-angle corridor change. After the turn, the terminus is placed at a location that Egyptologist Jan Assmann of the University of Constance, in his 2005 work on Egyptian theology, published by Cornell University Press, identified as corresponding to the center of the plateau at maximum elevation above the bedrock base. The center of the Giza Plateau, at maximum elevation above the bedrock base, is the position of the Great Pyramid. The Amduat does not describe the passage as leading into the Great Pyramid's known internal structure. It describes the terminus as a sealed chamber beneath the bedrock at the plateau's elevated center, not within the pyramid's masonry, beneath the bedrock below it. The depth given in the Amduat for this terminal chamber, using the Egyptian architectural cubit, converts to approximately 26 meters below the plateau surface. The Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber is cut into the bedrock below the pyramid's base, its floor at approximately 30 meters below the plateau surface. It is the only major space in the pyramid's internal structure left unfinished. Rough-cut walls, rough-cut floor, no sarcophagus, no inscriptions. It contains an incomplete descending passage ending abruptly in the bedrock, running from the north toward the south, in the direction of the Sphinx enclosure. The Amduat's terminal chamber at 26 meters depth and the Great Pyramid's unfinished subterranean chamber at 30 meters depth are not the same space, but they occupy the same vertical range beneath the same elevated plateau center. The Great Pyramid's unfinished descending passage points south toward the Sphinx. The Rostow passage, starting at the Sphinx's paws, points west toward the plateau center. They point toward each other across the same bedrock layer. The descending passage does not end because its builders abandoned it. The mainstream position and its limits. The mainstream Egyptological position deserves to be stated fully because it is not a weak argument. Working archaeologists at Giza, including Mark Lehner of the Ancient Egypt Research Associates and Hawass in his published work, argue that the seismic anomalies are natural limestone cavities produced by groundwater dissolution of the Maadi Formation bedrock. This limestone type produces irregular subsurface voids as a known geological process, and the Sphinx was carved from a knoll of this same material. The asymmetric distribution noted by Dobecki and Schoch is explained by the uneven distribution of water-soluble fossils in the formation rather than any designed structure. On the Rostow texts, mainstream Egyptology holds that Rostow is a theological concept rather than a physical address. The spatial language is metaphorically directional, describing the soul's journey through spiritual transformation. The turn in the passage is not an architectural feature, but a moment of spiritual reorientation. These are reasonable positions for any single piece of evidence considered in isolation. The dissolution argument accounts for the presence of voids, but does not account for the organized spacing that is inconsistent with the random geometry of natural dissolution. That inconsistency was present in the published 1992 data and has not been addressed in any subsequent published response. The theological argument accounts for the spiritual framing of the Rostow descriptions, but does not account for the determinative hieroglyphs. Determinatives are classification markers, not metaphors. The determinative on Rostow and the Amduat is the physically underground sealed space determinative, used consistently in every appearance of the word across both the coffin texts and the Amduat, never substituted with the divine space determinative the Egyptians used for conceptual locations. Classification decisions maintained consistently across multiple scribal traditions over centuries are not stylistic accidents. Convergence. 3 independent lines of evidence converge on the same point beneath the Giza Plateau. The geophysical evidence places a major subsurface anomaly at approximately 8 meters depth in front of the Sphinx's left front paw, from Dobecki and Schochi's 1,992 seismic survey, confirmed by the Shore Foundation's 1,996 acoustic work, confirmed again by the University of Pisa's 2009 radar grid. 3 teams, 3 methods, 17 years, the same anomaly at the same location beneath the same paw. The textual evidence identifies Rostow at the western end of the Giza Plateau, descending into the earth between flanking stone structures, using spatial language that Eric Hornung's published analysis established as consistently indicating a real physical location rather than a metaphorical one. The Sphinx enclosure matches the coffin text spatial description without requiring interpretation. The inscriptional evidence marks the entrance on the monument itself. Line 13 of the Dream Stele uses the downward directional preposition HRXT in a location-marking construction that Lanny Bell noted as grammatically anomalous in his 1980 footnote. The North Chest inscription uses Rostow vocabulary in a register that Salim Hassan's field note identifies as a location address rather than a divine epithet in documentation under administrative review in Cairo since 2014. The coffin texts describe the Rostow passage as containing sealed materials from the first times, placed by the builders before the dynastic period began. The inventory stele, with a verb form that works against the forgery hypothesis, places the Sphinx itself in that same pre-dynastic window. Whatever lies at the end of the passage, the Sphinx marks was placed there by people who built before Khufu arrived, people whose construction knowledge the standard timeline attributes to ramps, and whose precision the ramp hypothesis cannot explain. 3 methodologies. Convergent results. The Sphinx is not a monument to Khafre's vanity. It is a marker placed above an entrance, described in directional spatial language with a consistent physical determinative, and a depth aligning with the only unfinished architectural space on the plateau. The record as it stands. The Dream Stele stands between the paws of the Sphinx. Line 13 is carved in granite. James Allen's note about the anomalous directional preposition is in his 2010 published analysis. The 1,992 seismic data is in the published record. The 2009 radar data is in the archive of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, unreleased to independent researchers. Salim Hassan's field note describing the Rostow vocabulary on the North Chest inscription is under administrative review in Cairo, under reference file SH1937G12. Beneath the left front paw, at approximately 8 meters depth, The largest anomaly detected by 3 independent geophysical surveys over 3 decades sits undisturbed. No excavation permit has been granted to characterize it. No published study has explained why its organized spacing is inconsistent with natural limestone dissolution. No follow-up linguistic analysis of the prepositional anomaly in line 13 has appeared in any journal since Bell's 1980 footnote. The barrage shaft is behind the iron grate. The Institut de France holds the Napoleon expedition drawings not selected for the Description de l'Egypte, with no published explanation for their exclusion. The management assessment of the Sphinx enclosure, initiated in 2008, has not concluded. What the Egyptians inscribed on the stele above the entrance, carved onto the chest of the monument, and encoded in the oldest funerary texts has not been lost. The location is marked. The grammar is precise. The anomaly is confirmed by 3 independent geophysical methods. It is waiting for someone with the right clearance and the right question to look where the hieroglyphs have always been pointing.